Hello and welcome to episode 57 or 58. I'm not sure. I did write it on my screen, but episode 57 or 58. I think this is my fifth in 3 days, so it's been a back-to-back week. But we're going to be talking about pursuing the long game in sales, which on the topic of recording loads of podcasts, it's definitely a long game in podcasting too. So I think it's going to be a good chat. But I will hand over to my guest, Khris, to introduce himself and the company before we get going. So over to you, Khris.
Yeah, nice to be here. So my name is Khris Fenton. I'm the VP of Sales Development and Partnerships at Altrata. So we are a data intelligence platform. Essentially, the challenge of business development is how do you make sure that you're relevant? How do you make sure that you're reaching out to the right prospects? And so we have a collection of data points to really make sure that, if you're trying to land a meeting with a big executive, can you use connections to get there? How can you make sure that you are using trigger events the right way to drive business development? And so we're working on some pretty cool stuff, bringing that data into Salesforce and CRMs to just make business development easier, whether it's B2B, B2C, or even in the nonprofit space.
And how long, like broader terms, how long have you been selling?
Yeah. Professionally, I'd say a long time. So my career, I started off really like I loved sales even when I was a kid. I try to find little ways to sell things, whether it was undercutting the vending machines at school. I created a little mini lottery, which is a really long story. But I got into college and I did something that's kind of unique in the US called Student Painters, where I started a painting franchising company and hired college kids to actually paint. I had no idea how to do it. Went, knocked on doors, tried to get estimates, and that really got me started into sales. Knew I wanted to continue on that path, so I actually started with copier sales super early on, did that for a few years and made the transition into SaaS. So I've been in SaaS now for about 7 years, and with Altrata, previously Wealth Engine, we were acquired about 4 years. So I'm really excited about like early stage SaaS, go to market, been the first sales rep at companies, first sales rep in a new continent or market. And so I love just bringing things together and building.
It's interesting that the number of videos or people I've spoken to. I'm thinking Stephen Bartlett. He's a big name over in the US as well as the UK. But some of the most successful people started out selling sweets and drinks on the playground. I don't know what it is about that sort of mentality, but so many of the world's top 1% in terms of their industries used to sell sweets and crisps on the playground.
It's kind of funny, isn't it? It's like, figuring out what gets attention, I guess you could say at that age. It's there's only so many things, and then picking up on those trends. So I don't know. I hope to be like Stephen Bartlett, but no, it was fun. Got let's call it cease and desist from the school, but no, not too much trouble.
Still fighting it out in court all these years later.
Can't catch me.
But as we said, we're going to be talking about the long game in sales. We're going to kick off with a bit of an introduction, what your stance on it is, why we should be doing it, some of the like top level benefits, some considerations of almost like we said, the why and some of the things you have to think about. But probably the more useful part is the how-to that we'll go into as well. Like you said, you want a bit more of a deep dive where people can take this away and it's actionable insights that they can try and implement, next week, the week after, or whatever. So it should be a good chat. But before we go into that how-to bit portion of the episode, what do you mean by the long-term approach in the sales industry?
Yeah, so I think that with sales, there's always a focus on, this month or today, I got to hit my dials, got to hit my numbers this month, this year. And I think oftentimes reps often feel like they're starting from zero. They're starting from scratch. When your year ends, you have a great year, December 31st, January 1 comes around, I got to go do it again. And so I think when I think about the long game, it's really about delayed gratification. And we can talk a little bit more about what that means and sort of why I think that's important. But it's building optionality. And it's basically taking steps today that are going to help you 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years down the road, and being able to essentially channel what you're focusing on for the short term, but also thinking of the long term. And I think also aligning with buyers, because the reality is that most people you talk to in a sales role aren't ready today. So it's sort of shifting your mindset to think more about how can I align and make sure that I'm around and I'm the person that's being thought of when, let's say, a buyer comes through the door. how can I make sure that I'm taking steps in a sales cycle that I might not need, quite frankly, but if I do need them, I'm really happy that I did this thing today. So it's really balancing that, like, short term, I have to do these activities, but thinking about how can the activity that I'm taking today provide leverage in the future. And so that's what gets me, excited about, like, in sales, you can only control so many things, but you can really control your actions and what you're prioritizing with a little bit of discipline.
It's interesting you said sort of aligning to the current buying journey, the market at the minute. I think I saw some data from Dream or some information from Dream data that came out in the last week. And I think we're looking now at something like 80 to 90 days that the customer 80 to 90 days of research prior to reaching out to sales. And then the average sales cycle itself from the point of a new opportunity to closed one or whatever is another 80 to 90 days. So 160 days, that's a pretty long game anyway. And that's before you even think about, like you said, these considerations, these tactics of actually thinking about being a bit more patient rather than trying to jam the deal in as quickly as possible. And I think buyers are a lot more cautious nowadays. They like taking their time. They're not going to be rushed. So this pursuing the long game is not necessarily just a short-term fashionable tactic. It is just the way buyers want to buy nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is, like, I have this general thesis that, like, B2B buying habits typically lag like B2C buying habits by 5 to 10 years. And so if you think about it, like, the power of, like, how a buyer buys has changed so much, where you may have an issue or a problem that you're going to solve, but it might not be burning yet, but you start to do some research, you start to check out some forums, you start to really make it yourself an educated individual on the subject. And so as salespeople, we need to start to think a little bit more about how do we buy personally in our daily lives, and really think about, like, have some empathy, like, what does that look like? And it's not, sort of like, just, you don't just make a decision one day that I'm going to go buy a new car necessarily, like, or I'm going to go buy a new laptop, whatever it is. And so how can you insert yourself higher up in that funnel, make sure that you're educating, but also use, frankly, tactics that are more known conventionally with B2C than B2B, so that you can start to meet buyers in that way. So I think, the reality is that we can't necessarily control how buyers buy. We need to make sure that we're aligning within that process. And, we all buy something every day. So it's really just about kind of zooming out and having a little bit of empathy.
Yeah, I think I can't remember the actual name of the guy who came up with this principle, but we wanted to talk about the 97-3 principle, which is, I see, like 97-3, 95-5, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about fat percentage in beef here. We're talking about 95% of buyers are not ready to buy. It's just 3% that are. So you have to think more about the 95% than you do the 3%, or you at least have to think about both of them, with as much sort of effort and understanding. So do you want to just run us through, that from your perspective?
Yeah. So, like, if you think about that sort of like 95-5, I think what the mistake that I see a lot of SDRs making, AEs, or their prospecting is they're really focused on that who's actively buying, like, who is experiencing a problem right now. The irony of that is they're typically turning off a large part of their audience. So yeah, you might actually find that 5% through thousands of emails, calls, and you can get lucky, but you're going to bang your head against the wall to really find that diamond in the rough. What doesn't get talked a lot about is what happens to the other 95%. I don't know about you, like, the block button and the report to junk button is really easy to find, whether it's on LinkedIn or whether it's an email. And I think a lot of buyers, when they start to get somebody that's approaching them before they're ready with a message that's not really tailored to the buyer, not really educating or informing them, it's really quick and easy to hit the junk mail button. And what you then do is you start to narrow and take those potential buyers in the future totally out of your funnel. And so I think the irony of it, though, is that if you hit the 100%, let's say, with the approach of how do I hit the 95%, guess what? Like, if somebody's in that active buying phase, they're going to be interested. Like, they're actually going to raise their hand and say, you know what, actually, this does, strike a nerve. This is something that I want to talk about. And so when you can focus higher up on the funnel and not make yourself sort of like the pesky, hey, do you have 50 minutes? Can we talk about this? The can I throw time on your calendar next week sort of, CTAs. You'll actually capture everybody that, is either thinking about buying or just frankly interested in trying to set themselves up for that next, meeting, or thinking about, when this problem arises, how can I talk about options or, ways that I can really like educate a larger team for solving a problem.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of demand gen in marketing. I don't like if there are any new listeners. I work in marketing. I don't work in sales, despite the fact I talk to salespeople every week. But um, demand gen in marketing is playing exactly the same as what we're talking about, playing the long game of creating demand by speaking to the customer about the problems that they have, but 6 months before that they might be thinking about your product, service, or solution to meet their needs. And it's exactly the same thing. Like, we could run a marketing campaign that's like 20% off by now, or we could educate people consistently 365 days a year, make them aware of the problem or solution, so that 3 to 6 months down the line, when they're thinking, actually, yeah, I do need a new supplier for this. Oh, I remember those guys. Yeah. So it does remind me a lot of that. So, yeah, interesting. We were going to chat through some other, like, I guess, key considerations, key sort of benefits, or key sort of points before we go into the how to sort of portion of it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I remember, like a highlight I remember off our first call, was like differentiation in the market, in terms of setting yourself apart from other sales reps as a bit of a tactic. We can either talk about that now, or we can put that into the how to play the long sort of game as part of the sales cycle. Would you
Yeah.
rather do it as part of the sales cycle? Or?
No, let's talk about it now. But I think we can dig into that. I think, like my personal opinion is a lot of sales reps sort of don't realize how educated and how much they're an expert in the space, and they're talking with, potentially a few different, customers or buyers. And really, what that lens, if you can start to zoom out, is you start to pick up on the key problems and the key issues. Once you can do that, you then become an expert in the problems, which I think is actually more important than being an expert in the solutions. And being an expert in the problems, the way that you realize this is you start to, play it back to people, and you start to recap a call, or you start to recap what they've said to you. And then you sort of lay out the next steps or the root causes of where that's coming from or what that typically leads to. And you'll typically get like that's it, that's right. And I think being educated and really focusing on that education component first, what it starts to do versus, let me give you the inverse, versus, hey, let me tell you about my product. Here's why we're better than our top 10 competitors. Here's, why I think we're great. Can you buy this month? Sellers start to get guarded with that. They start to understand that you're on your agenda, you're focused on yourselves, versus the inverse of, here's what I'm seeing in the space. And typically when I talk to people like you, they're dealing with one of these problems. Is that relevant? Like, are these problems that you're having? And sort of being agnostic to your solution, but focusing more on the problems, you start to see them let their guard down. You start to hear more of them sharing. You start to really get behind the scenes, because at the end of the day, the more that you can show credibility, the more that somebody will feel understood. And being understood, in my opinion, is like the key to actually breaking through in a sales conversation, because until that buyer actually feels understood, they're sort of playing this dance of like, should I share with you? Are you worth my time? Do you get me? And so to me, at the end of the day, like that boils down into just being educated in your space, whether it's the conversations you're having, or we can talk more about like how you become educated in your craft. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, how do I make somebody feel understood? And you need to have kind of a core skill set of understanding their day to day, understanding who they are.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I was speaking to Jen from Lavender last week, and she used the exact phrase you did there, which was become an expert in the problem. And that's something they're big believers in. And it was exactly the same theory of, like, buyers nowadays don't want to have a salesperson sitting there going, you need our solution because of these features and it's better than they what they want to hear is someone say, look, I speak to people all the time about the issues that you're having. Have you actually tried A, B, or C that are free of charge? Have you tried doing that before we chat about our product? And I'm more than happy to chat chat through this with you. I can show you some like recent stuff that we've actually done with others that we've spoken to. Sure, if you have tried that, let's talk about the product. But we understand where you're at. We've been there, and we can help you out of it. And I think they said it's like become an expert in the problem, but it's almost anti-sales as like a tactic.
Yeah, I think it's like being okay with losing fast. Quite frankly, like once you shift your dynamic from my job is to sell something, my job is to hit a number, to actually on this first call, my job is to figure out the reasons why you're not going to buy. Like I need to figure out, like, do you have a problem that's worth solving? Like, is what I know the cost of solving the problem actually like worth it? Are you going to 10x, 100x, whatever the x is, the return? And starting to think about it from a little bit of a pessimistic standpoint of trying to find those yellow flags, red flags, and being really open versus kind of the happy ears of, like pushing my solution towards somebody. So I think, when we think about, like, again, bring it back to playing a long game, it's, I don't need this deal, quite frankly. Like whatever it is, whatever's in front of me, if you can approach it from a position of strength, a buyer's going to feel that. And I think that sometimes one of the issues, and we can talk more about this, is that a lot of salespeople have never bought something in a B2B setting. And I think that after you've been through enough sales calls as a buyer, you within 2 minutes know what sort of seller you're dealing with. Like it's almost instantaneous, and they can feel either the need from somebody pushing, their agenda, or they can feel that like actually this person gets it, they're playing it cool, they really want to understand what's going on. Because the worst thing that can happen, or the worst thing that I feel like from a buyer's perspective, is when a salesperson assumes that their solution is right for you without actually understanding why. And so once you fall into that trap, in my opinion, you're dead in the water. Because if somebody's like, nope, you missed it, there's really no coming back from that. You've lost that credibility. And I think you got to have the credibility to push something along.
And it's definitely it's something that's probably becoming a lot more widespread, maybe in the last 3 to 6 months, like that whole movement, let's call it. But hopefully it continues, like and people, reps start to think less about commission in the short term, and more about building relationships, and potentially buying and selling to the same people for the next 20 years rather than a one-off. Okay, right. In terms of this how-to then, so
Yeah.
we've kind of spoken about what we're on about, state of the market, all the juicy bits, the how-to. So how should reps and managers as well, how should individual contributors, but also team managers and heads of, play the long game in sales? Like, where do they start?
Yeah. So I think bringing it back to like the core general thesis is like, what can I do right now that might not benefit me in the future, but if I do the right things, it's going to stack the odds an extra few percentage. And after you start to do that a few more times, you're going to have a real big advantage. So we can talk about it from an individual contributor standpoint. We can talk about it for a manager, but really what this boils down to is like delayed gratification. Something that's not going to give me a payback right now, but there's a good chance that it will. And if I am able to cash in on it, I'm going to be super happy that I took that sort of step. So I have an SMB small business team, work a lot of inbound. And so with inbound high velocity, again, you get a lot of different types of buyers. So let's break it down super tactical. Like you get a demo request. A lot of times it's not with somebody that has the ideal title that you're looking for. One of the easiest things that most reps can do that they're not doing today is go on LinkedIn, figure out who they report to, go send a connection request to your core buyer, your core decision maker. Hey, I'm talking with Jamie this week. Really interested in understanding what's going on at your company. That said, if you need anything, I'm here to reach out. What have you done? You've opened up a line of communication that you can come back to in the future if, for whatever reason, Jamie isn't going to get you where you need to go. From there, it's around prep. Like I think this is the easiest thing that salespeople can get right, is like be an investigator in 30, 60 minutes before getting onto a sales call. Understand what are the different dynamics that are going on. Are they growing? Are they shrinking? Department size. Identify the targets that you want to involve in a conversation and a follow-up. These are really easy things that then allow you to get onto a call with a plan and a mission. From there, my biggest, what I see most sales calls go wrong is actually at the beginning. It's an agenda. So an agenda to me is like such an important element of a sales call, because it gives you that control to set the expectation. And anybody who's a frontline seller, you hop on a call and the buyer's like, all right, dance, show me what you got. And it completely ruins the flow of a call where if you could just set an agenda, talk about what you're going to go through, what the potential outcomes are, what you'd expect, and also ask somebody what they're looking to get out of a conversation, you can focus that call and make sure that it's useful to them. Speed things up. We go through, if you get to the end of the sales call, next steps. It's everybody knows that you need to do it. That is delayed gratification, right? You could ask them for, a follow-up a week later, or you could nail down what next steps look like, or you could give them the door. You say, hey, I'm not getting the vibe that maybe this is like a top priority for you. Is this something that we should wait on? Or should we, should we kill this? Do you want to part ways? Like, what do you see as some concerns of moving forward? It's okay to lose deals fast because that actually helps future you. Say you go and win the deal. The other main thing that I talk to my reps a lot about is 30, 60 days after implementation, go back, see if you have a reference, see if they can refer you to somebody. So it's all of these little steps that are getting in the way that you can do to set yourself up that, maybe you didn't need that agenda. Maybe you didn't need that LinkedIn connection request. Maybe you didn't need to set that next step. But in a lot of cases, when you look back at why a deal was lost, it's that one thing that was missed that you can't really go back in time to do. And it's about sort of having that discipline to do the hard things now versus waiting until later and hoping that things go in your favor. So a little bit of a step by step there, but I think it's just what can I do now that's going to set me up potentially in the future? It's like an insurance policy.
The phrase towards the start of that where you said delayed gratification.
Yeah.
That's not a phrase. That's not a phrase anyone wants to hear, but I guess it's a phrase that people need to get comfortable with, right? It's in a market like we've discussed where it's harder than ever, longer sales cycles than ever, more stakeholders than ever. You're going to have to get very, very used to delayed gratification, and that's almost I don't know, not necessarily an adjustment, but it's almost a skill, isn't it? Having to adapt the way you work to delayed gratification.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the Stanford marshmallow experiment?
No, go on. It sounds
Oh,
interesting.
this is crazy. So this guy blew my mind. Back in the 70s, there was this I guess psychologist that ran this experiment where basically he was looking to test delayed gratification. So get into a room with a younger child, put a marshmallow in front of them, and basically say, I'm going to go leave the room. I'm going to come back in 10 minutes, something like that. And if you don't eat that marshmallow, when I come back, I'll give you a few. I'll give you 2, 3, whatever it is. And so did a bunch of these tests and then came back about 20 years later to see where those people were in their lives and in their careers. And guess what? The kids that didn't take the marshmallow in front of them generally were more successful, higher income, all of those different things. And what he attributed it to is delayed gratification, basically being number one, something that is innately linked to success. But when you're a small child, like you're not like, hey, I got to delay my gratification. You're not thinking about compound interest, but it is a skill that you can start to learn and that you can really focus on. But the long-term, implications, it's like investing, it's like working out. It's sort of like, if I can do these things and I can be disciplined in the long run, it's going to pay off for me. And it's, something that I think is really important to not always take the marshmallow when it's in front of you and really think about what you get back if you can be patient.
Have you got any, like speaking from experience, have you got anything, any tactics or strategies that have worked well for you that have helped you change your mindset or align your mindset more to this delayed gratification? I'm thinking things like not going into a deal process with a predefined timeline. As in, you would go in thinking it's going to take as long as it takes, rather than I've got to get this done in 60 days because that's the industry average.
Yeah. So the hard part for people who are trying to make a transition to this is like, again, you have a quota, you have a number in front of you. What I started to do when I was a rep is on Sundays, I would literally make a list of what are things that I can do tomorrow that are going to benefit me in a month, in a year. And I start to map those things out, throw them onto my calendar. This gets really, really important when you're thinking about like starting a new role, transitioning industries, and it gets into education, quite frankly. And that's something we can talk a lot about because that was really important for me. But it's being intentional with, I need to do an activity, and whether it's 10% of my time, 20% of my time, but like I need to allocate a lane towards the future and not just allocating it towards what I'm doing now. And I think that being sort of disciplined in that, I don't know if that answers your question, is really the key of just being intentional with it, thinking about it from like your career perspective. But when you're getting into, let's say, like an opportunity or into a deal cycle, it's thinking about not trying to skip steps. Sometimes we hear buyers, yep, I'm ready to buy. I had a rep that went through this recently where she kept continuing going on into a deal, was brought to the CEO, and we had a conversation, a deal review, like, what's the pain? Like something's missing here. And we started to realize that we hadn't really identified somebody that was responsible for the problem. And she got onto the call with the CEO. Long story short, we really identified there was no, reason for change. And we went back and said, you know what, we knew this was going to happen. We kind of had a sense of it, but it was not being too eager to get to the end, and actually in some ways slowing down. Nobody wants to hear that in a sales cycle. We all want to move faster, can actually help you get to the end, or at least mitigate the risk of being, sort of blindsided at the end. Because the absolute worst thing that can happen in sales is you take too long to lose a deal. And like, that is the worst thing that can happen. It's not losing a deal. Losing a deal fast is fantastic. If you take too long to lose a deal, you have done something wrong and you need to reevaluate where it went sideways. And I think that that's on us as leaders and managers to make sure that we kind of instill that mindset, because once you unlock that, it changes things.
I think that the way you said about the taking a long time to lose a deal or whatever, it reminds me of, I think it's a Facebook thing where it's like one of their like values is fail often and fail fast.
Yeah.
Something like that, isn't it? Where and the whole, I think the whole premise of that is like you learn a lot more from the failures than you do from necessarily like the successful opportunities. And if you do that often and you do it quickly, then you're going to learn a hell of a lot more, and ultimately, like you said, you're going to be able to optimize that process, and the deals are going to get bigger and better as time goes on.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, like selfishly, I'd rather remove opportunities that aren't real so that I can focus on those that are, and sort of approach conversations with a mindset of like, I'm here to work with you if you are looking to solve a problem. There's a really great book that doesn't get a lot of play that to me is like the sales Bible, called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play, that really starts to change your mindset of like, my job is to solve a problem, whether it's me or somebody else. But you have to get that sort of like, it takes two to tango, and you have to be very real and call out sort of the elephant in the room to make sure that you're on the same page with the buyer. And so like, I want to focus on things that are real, because in a way, I also don't want to inflate a pipeline. I don't want to give myself like a false sense of what I can close. I kind of want to look at it as severely as possible in many ways. I really want to make sure that I have a good, sense of reality.
No, I'm going to be open and honest here. I'm an extremely impatient individual. I'm extremely persistent, but I'm very impatient. So I can imagine patience is a massive, a great trait to have when you're thinking about this like long-term game. So like patience for you, patience as a team leader. How do you begin to instill that in people? How do you promote patience?
That's a good one. The one thing I want to say is like, delay gratification isn't about inaction. So like, I want to be clear on that, because it's not about sort of like being hopeful. It's about a bias towards a lot of good actions fast, but balancing that out. When it comes to patience, like as a leader, I think sometimes the trap leaders get stuck in is looking at results versus leading indicators. And oftentimes when there's a challenge or a problem, there's typically some leading indicators that if you look back can help you do that. So I really try to focus again on like focusing my team on what they can control. So if I'm an SDR, I'm focused on like, how do I get replies? Replies ultimately are a leading indicator to getting a meeting booked. If I'm an AE, what I'm focused on is how can I get, the number of people that are involved in my sales cycle larger, because I know that if I have 3 to 5, much higher close rate than just having a single threaded person on there. And so I don't know if this answers your question, but being patient to me is about not necessarily focusing on like what's on the scoreboard, but focusing on what are the leading indicators in front of me that I can control. And yeah, having a little bit of faith that like if you do enough of those good things over time, the scoreboard takes care of itself. And so I think sometimes you got to focus your reps on like, it's okay. I see what's happening here. I see that you're doing the right things early on, and we'll continue to push forward, and the results will take care of themselves. And not getting too stressed, not getting desperate, because you can abandon this whole mindset quickly and then you start selling desperate, and that's not really good for anybody. And so you got to have that, sort of balance and lens as a leader to make sure you can focus on the leading indicators versus, what happens when the deal closes.
Yeah, no, I think yeah, that definitely answers the question. Like for me in marketing, I call them positive signals, but it's exactly the same. It's those leading indicators of look, I'm impatient in that I want to see the podcast reach a certain number of weekly followers or 10,000 downloads. But the what you're saying is, if I look at weekly, monthly, quarterly listens, follows, and it's all trending nicely up, then I'm sort of curtailing my impatience because I'm like, okay, well, last week I did better than the week before. So something I'm doing is, is leading me towards that ultimate goal.
Yeah, look, if anybody who starts working out, like you're not gonna look like a Greek god, in 2 weeks, right? Like, but you start to track, your weights. Like, am I making progression in my sets, in my reps, whatever it is? That lets you, focus really on what's in front of you, and maybe you aren't making progress. That's great, but you're not exactly focused on the outcome of, looking like Adonis. You're focused on like your bench press or whatever the deadlift, whatever it may be. So it's focusing on those things that you can control. I'll share a quick story. We rolled out a chat platform on our website called Qualified, which is an awesome tool that allows our team to basically message people on the website. When we rolled that out, the comp plan wasn't how many meetings did you book. It was actually what's your conversation rate. Like, how can you get somebody to respond to you as a human? And then as we started to learn through that, we were able to set, attainable goals. But focusing on the input that drives the most leverage is really key for sales leaders, especially when you're thinking about rolling out a new initiative or whatever it is and seeing that incremental progress, just focusing on like that one thing.
Yeah, no, I think the gym's a great example. I'm anyone who knows me sort of face to face personally or whatever will tell you that I'm big into the gym. I always have been, but I've been into the gym since second year of uni, so a decade. And people always ask me, okay, oh, how do you do this? How do you do that? How shall I improve that? And I say to them, I was like, go 4 days a week for 10 years.
Yeah.
It's as easy as that. And they're like, oh, what? And I'm like, well, it's a long-term thing. Like you're not going to get overnight results. And yeah, that's a very, very good metaphor. I don't know if metaphor is the right word. I don't know.
Yeah.
Comparison of like, that you should be think of your deal cycle as a, I don't know, as a diet or a new body, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. No, it's look, I think we all have those things, but it's about like what is that compound interest that we can build, and that's not fun, that's not sexy, you don't see it every day. But if you're focused on the right things, it tends to work itself out, and the universe rewards action. And I think that at the end of the day is what we can all keep in mind.
Yeah, you spoke there about some of the things that you try and encourage in your team and leadership and training and things. So,
Yeah.
what can any sales leaders listening? What sort of culture? What sort of what are more of those leading indicators that they should be tracking that are more important than the short term stuff that we're saying try to move away from towards a more long term stuff? What do they need to be thinking about?
Yeah. So days to close lost. If we take that one back, I think that's a really important metric that can tell you a lot about how fast your reps are losing, and can really give you a sense of how you're qualifying and if your team is spending the right time with the right people. So I'd say that is one. Conversation rate or conversion from conversation, if you're thinking like from an outbound perspective, is certainly key. And then I think at the end of the day, sometimes you have to just like really focus on velocity. And so there's, a couple of different, calculations of like what pipeline velocity looks like. But to me, that is oftentimes the best indicator of understanding how many deals are working, what's the average sales price, what is the sales cycle. And you need a little bit of data to build up like what's good versus what's bad. But that to me is something that once you get that data set established can tell you a lot about how somebody is trending in the right direction.
And I'm just trying to sort of finish off. We got a hard stop, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
I'm just trying to finish off with some, I guess, lessons learned from your perspective. So, like, what's the what have you found the best channel is for playing the long game? I.e., is it that you try to invest more time into WhatsApp because that's more of a conversational platform? Is it that you prefer face to face? Like, what channel really helps to promote this like long term strategy?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think it's unique to the individual, and everybody should sort of ask themselves that question. One that we've invested time, energy, and resources in with our team is on LinkedIn. So I think LinkedIn is super underutilized by most salespeople. If you go to a lot of salespeople's LinkedIn, it's I crushed quota, I was top on the team, I closed X amount of deals, and it's very like repulsive, quite frankly, to buyers. But I think if you start to think about LinkedIn as a way to create leverage, a way to frankly give yourself optionality, and also, by the way, a way that you can connect with 20 buyers a day to start to see your message in a different sort of medium, that's an area that I think is still, even though LinkedIn's what, 20 plus years old, still untapped because it's very much still being used as like the in-mail machine. And I think I might have gotten thousands of emails. I've responded to like one of them ever. But those that are putting out content, those that are establishing themselves as experts, and frankly doing video, breaking through as humans, are those that I think are going to win, not just in the job that they're doing, but guys, like you're not going to be at your company forever. The more that you can, set yourself up with an audience of hundreds or thousands of buyers, that makes you a lot more hireable in your next role, whatever that might be. So I think LinkedIn is what I see is like there's not one size fits all for thinking the long game, but to me today, that's pretty much the best for a professional to focus their time on.
And what do you think, from your perspective, is the most valuable thing you've learned over the course of your career? That linked into that, like playing the long game. What's been the most valuable thing you've learned?
Deposits before withdrawals. So before you're going to try to make a withdrawal from somebody, from something, make sure that you've made plenty of deposits. So it's kind of there's some Gary V's in this, but if you start to think about your role as sort of giving things away for free and being okay and vulnerable with giving too much, you start to set yourself up to at least be in a position to make withdrawals. But if you're constantly going around asking for things, being focused on you in the now, it makes it tougher. So I guess there's obviously some delayed gratification rate in there. It's make deposits so that you give yourself the opportunity to make withdrawals.
Follow up question on that one is like, give us an example of those making deposits. Is it sharing valuable content? Is it being an expert in the problem and trying to help people through free options that come before your solution? What are some good examples of making deposits?
Yeah, I think if we think about like LinkedIn as the medium, it's very much like an easy way to think about it is take the problems that you're hearing that other customers are having and start to talk about them. Start to talk about the alternatives that aren't your solution. Give people paths to make progress that don't necessarily require you, almost to the point where you feel like you're giving away too much of the good stuff, and really put yourself in the shoes of a buyer that maybe isn't ready to take like the big leap forward, but does want to show incremental progress for free. And so I think that if you sort of align your mindset, whether it's content, what you're posting around that, or even commenting and engaging, you'll find yourself attracting people that want to learn more because you know what, if Jamie just gave that away for free, like what does it mean when I actually pay for something? What does it mean if I'm a customer? And so I think that just kind of having that mindset of like, I don't know how much more I want to give because I'm giving a lot here. I think that's when you've probably struck the right balance of creating content that's valuable for people, that's not self-promotional.
Is there anyone you think does that really, really well that people listening could go and check out?
Yeah, so like Jake Dunlap, I think does a fantastic job of that. He has a lot of just tactical stuff that's out there. And we work with our team quite frankly because of that. I think that Jason Bay does a really good job of it as far as some of the things that he puts out there. And Josh Braun was like one of the first sort of sales influencers that I feel like, really made a big impact as far as, my career and understanding how you can move things forward without sort of being the pushy seller. So those are a few folks that really sort of give you the how to, and make it really on you to follow through.
Yeah, I think we've done a couple of episodes where we talked about personal branding and that sort of stuff. But if you're thinking about making these deposits, go and follow those three, see what they do over the course of a few weeks, a few months, and try and find some patterns, try and find some trends, try and replicate it in your own way. That's a great place to get started.
Yeah.
The people that I follow on LinkedIn are the people that I rate highly in terms of their content, and I'm like, right, I want to be there one day in terms of the slick quality of their content, or the actual quality of the educational content. So yeah, definitely go and do that. Surround yourself by people who are where you want to get to.
Yeah, pattern matching.
Yeah. One final question to finish. Podcast and nominate. Who do I need to get on the podcast next, and why?
I would say I've got a good friend, Sarah, who leads sales at ChargeBee. And so I would nominate Sarah. She and I actually sort of grew up together, I would say, at a startup, my first SaaS startup. We were bringing a product to market in Salesforce. And so Sarah has got a really great mindset around how to build teams, how to focus on the right things, and again, sort of how to take the right mindset to help make progress. So I got to go with my friend Sarah.
Well, I think it's a good link because we use ChargeBee here, so that should be a nice little hook as well to try and persuade her to get on.
Yeah. So I would say that, and you know what, as I'm thinking about it, she's going to kill me. So we might have to push this back out. But Sarah's at a Chart Mogul. So that's I think I just totally tanked the company she's at, a little bit of a mini competitor. But yeah, Sarah's over at Chart Mogul. So if you haven't seen those guys, they do some really interesting things with SaaS analytics. And now I'll take my medicine for giving ChargeBee a little free promo.
You've saved yourself. You've saved yourself. I could tell you it's a terrible tool, but I'm not going to do that anyway. But yeah, help you out there. It's a terrible tool. But anyway, look, I appreciate you jumping on. We've got a hard stop. Otherwise, we probably would carry on chatting. But hopefully, those listening or watching have got something useful out there off the back of it. Got some tips and tricks. Whether you're an individual contributor or a team lead. But no, I appreciate you jumping on, Chris.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jamie.
And please make sure you hit the like button, follow, subscribe, and leave a review. If you've been listening for a while, leave us a review. It really, really does help, and we will catch you in the next episode.